What if the biggest limitation in life isn't what people can't see, but what they refuse to understand? Oh, welcome to the Coachman. And for today's lovely reading, we're going to be reading The Blind Man from Kate Chopin. This was a early 19th century um, short story written in the United States. And unlike, I'll give you a brief just to say this. If you read the last story, Bill the Ventriloquist, I think you're gonna see that this story is slightly different because Bill was about like not being able to understand something. This is, I believe, is more about not wanting to, which bring two different results. So, with that being said, let's get into the story and enjoy. A man carrying a small red box in one hand walked slowly down the street. His old straw hat and faded garments looked as if the rain had often beaten upon them, and the sun had as many times dried them upon his person. He was not old, but he seemed feeble, and he walked in the sun along the blistering asphalt pavement. On the opposite side of the street, there were trees that threw a thick and pleasant shade. People were all walking on that side, but the man did not know, for he was blind, and moreover, he was stupid. Hmm. I do have questions, but I'll put it this way: the only question I have is why she had to say, moreover, he was stupid. I'll let that question sit. In the red box were lead pencils, which he was endeavoring to sell. He carried no stick, but guided himself by trailing his foot along the stone copings or his hand along the iron railings. When he came to the steps of a house, he would mount them, sometimes after reaching the door with great difficulty. He could not find the electric button, whereupon he would patiently descend and go his way. So some of the iron gates were locked, their owners being away for the summer, and he would consume much time striving to open them, which made little difference, as he had all the time there was at his disposal. I will say, that's where this blind dude, I would call him stupid. Now, at first reading it, I'm sure that many people were like, oh, he's just a blind man wandering around, whatnot. But let me put out this image, okay? It's only an image, just to go show you where I'm headed, or where at least my head went first. So I want you to imagine me, okay? I'm 6'2", black dude, glasses, real tall and thin. Imagine that you saw me walking around your neighborhood, and when I came upon the gate, even though it wouldn't open, I kept fidgeting with it. I'm sure many of you already were like, okay, I see where you're going. Yeah. But the funny part is that the actual, if you want to say the painting or the image that goes with this, is a white old man. And notice, it doesn't say anything about him, you know, anybody's looking at him funny or whatever. But I'm just saying, even in those times, you see a dude walking around fidgeting with gates. I'm sorry, I'm asking questions. You know what I mean? So at times, he succeeded in finding the electric button. But the man or maid who answered the bell needed no pencil, nor could they be induced to disturb the mistress of the house about so small a thing. The man had been out long and had walked far, but had sold nothing. That morning, someone had finally grown tired of having him hanging around, had equipped him with his box of pencils, and sent him out to make his living. Hunger, with sharp fangs, was gnawing at his stomach, and a consuming thirst parched his mouth and tortured him. So that's crazy. So somebody saw him wandering around one day and just handed him this box of pencils. It's interesting. The sun was broiling. He wore too much clothing, a vest and coat over his shirt. He might have removed these and carried them on his arm or thrown them away, but he did not think of it. A kind woman who saw him from an upper window felt sorry for him and wished that he would cross over into the shade. Hmm? The man drifted into a side street where there was a group of noisy, excited children at play. The color of the box which he carried attracted them, and they wanted to know what was in it. One of them attempted to take it away from him. With the instinct to protect his own and his only means of subsistence, he resisted, shouted at the children, and called them names. A policeman coming around the corner and seeing that he was the center of a disturbance, jerked him violently around by the collar, but upon perceiving that he was blind, considerably refrained from clubbing him and sent him on his way. He walked on in the sun. I'll tell you that and keep it all the way a buck. If that was today, regardless of race, that dude is getting his ass whooped. Now I will say this, not everywhere, because I will say I do believe that like cops are getting a lot better at dealing with like the public, especially where I live. I live in a neighborhood where I do see a lot of like homeless, and I do see the cops dealing with them like very humanely. But let's you got to keep it 100, yeah. Like you see a beggar messing with a bunch of kids, even if the kids started that shit, like 9 out of 10, that dude's gonna get lumped up like real quick. So during his aimless rambling, he turned into a street where there were monster electric cars thundering up and down, clanging wild bells, and literally shaking the ground beneath his feet with their terrific impetus. He started to cross the street. Then something happened. Something horrible happened that made the woman faint, and the strongest men who saw it grow sick and dizzy. The motorman's lips were as gray as his face, and that was a sheen gray, and he shook and staggered from the superhuman effort he had put forth to stop his car. So I'm sure you maybe, because I got a little bit like kind of thrown sideways, but basically what happened is that it looks like the man turned down a real busy street with like all these electric cars and whatnot, and then something happened, but we don't know yet, so we'll see. Where could the crowds have come from so suddenly, as if by magic? Boys on the run, men and women tearing up on their wheels to see the sickening sight, doctors dashing in buggies as if directed by Providence. But the horror grew when the multitude recognized in the dead and mangled figure one of the wealthiest, most useful and most influential men of town, a man noted for his prudence and foresight. How could such a terrible fate have overtaken him? He was hastening from his business house, for he was late to join his family, who were to start in an hour or two for their summer home on the Atlantic coast. In his hurry, he did not perceive the other car coming from the opposite direction, and the common, harrowing thing was repeated. The blind man did not know what the commotion was all about. He had crossed the street, and there he was, stumbling on in the sun, trailing his foot along the coping. So I had to stop and like really think about this one, because even for me, like reading it and like kind of knowing about the story, I had to think like a little bit, because look at it this way, yeah. Remember how I said that, like, why did the woman call the blind man stupid? Like, there was no reasoning. Like, she didn't give a reason as to, like, okay, yeah, he's this blind beggar roaming around trying to sell pencils, walking up to people's doorbells in, like, the blazing heat. And instead of going on the side where all the shade is, like everybody else, this guy's just in the blazing, like, hot ass sun, right? And most people would say, okay, yeah, this guy is stupid. It's hot and he's walking out in the sun, right? And most people would say, oh, yeah, well, all these people walking in the shade, they're walking in the shade. And that's smart, right? We consider that smart. But I think, like, when I just had to think about it for a second, in that situation, right, you had two people, two men, one rich, one poor. One apparently, of course, because he's wealthy, smart, and obviously probably walking on the side of the shade. And the other one, poor and stupid, right? But here's the thing: is that they come at a crossroads, a little road, and they both cross it. But there's, like, obviously there's some danger to it. And look who comes out on top. Like, look who ends up just getting, like, paying the ultimate price, and who just keeps walking on. Like, who do you think is stupid? You know what I mean? And I think that, like, even though it's not as clear as I guess we would want to say, of, like, this, the wisdom isn't, like, right there in your face. It actually is, in a sense. So how about this? Let me paint another picture for you that's similar to this story. And I think that everybody can relate to what the author is trying to say. So I'm gonna put it in this terms, like, in this way, yeah. But it's gonna sound maybe cruel, but I think everybody's seen this, right? You got two guys in their mid 30s. One lives with his one is, like, let's say, makes like $150,000 a year, has all his own stuff, works at, like, some great Fortune 500 company, and he grew up being like the life of the party, Mr. Big Shot, whatever, but not arrogant, but he was just that guy, okay? And now you have the other guy where life hasn't been too great, but he's done things, he's traveled, you know what I mean? He's like maybe a snowboard instructor, you know what I mean, during the winter, works on the beach, just kind of playing through life. Doesn't really have much going on for it. Still lives with his mom and dad. And both of these dudes come across a woman, right? So the first guy, the one that lives with moms and all that, he comes across her. He can talk. You know what I mean? He's an outgoing guy. He's a good guy. He just doesn't have, like, all the other stuff. But he's a decent dude. Can relate to people. He's just a good person. Goes out with this girl, and eventually, let's say after, like, a couple of months, she's like, yeah, dude, you ain't got no potential. You got to go. You're broke. You know what I mean? Breaks his heart, and then he just keeps it moving, right? Then the other guy, more successful one, he meets this woman, all right? They're in heaven. They go through the dating. They do all this. They do all that. And then only to have, like, the woman ends up cheating on him. Because she's got, like, oh, she found another dude that's got more money. Yeah. And when she leaves, she takes half of his alimony and all that stuff. Yeah. Like, on the surface, you could look at it and you could say, okay, The first guy, he was cool, but you can say something like, why did he ever think that he could date that girl? You know what I mean? She was like above him. She was too good for him. You know what I mean? And I'm like, you should have saw that coming. You should have just hit it and quit it, left it alone. You know what I mean? She was out of your league and whatnot. But with the second guy, you kind of almost look at him like, dang, why did she leave him? What did he, like, you might look at him and be like, what did he do wrong? What were his demons and whatnot? You know what I mean? But look at him. He now has all this alimony. He's broke. He's down on his luck, just like the other guy. But who actually ended up on the right side? You know what I mean? And that's the thing. I think what this story is trying to do is, if you look at like both of those gentlemen that I was telling you about and the ones in the story, you had one that it looked like he had it all, brains, he had like everything. You know what I mean? And we just give, because these people, they look a certain way, we think all these other attributes come along with it. But then we look at the poor man and we look at the guy who doesn't have as much money, and we're like, oh, you know, they might probably not as smart, not as funny. They're just like kind of bums or whatever. But we just gave you two crossroads that all four of these gentlemen came at, and who came out on top. If you look at it, one lost his life, the other one lost like pretty much his livelihood, and the other two, they just picked up the pieces and kept it pushing. So were they really, like, you can say, oh, well, that was just life. But in actuality, no, maybe the blind man, he was actually, like, yes, he might have been blind, but maybe he knew how to cross his street. Maybe he's done this 50 million times to where he has the whole streetcars and he knows, like, the area to where he can get across, no problem. But you got this other guy who's just walking across, running or whatever, and gets bowled over because he wasn't paying attention. Or whatever it is, he didn't have enough of the skills or the knowledge to make it across the street, but the blind man did. Maybe by being charismatic and not having all this money, but just being a good person, the guy that was broke, okay, he might have not had all the charisma, the money, and all that, but yet, you know what? He got out of that because he did his thing, he enjoyed this young lady, and then just went on his way. Dodged the bullet. But the other guy didn't. He took a bullet. Several. So I think overall, like, when I read these, like, I think the overall, like, I think we get it. You know, the overall takeaway is basically that, like, look, what we often see, like, sometimes what we see, it can become a blindness because we assume. In other words, human beings often see only what they expect to see. And sometimes that becomes its own blindness from the outside. So maybe sometimes we might want to take an extra look and say, wait, hold on. This person over here looks like they might have it all, and they might be better, if you want to say. But that guy might know something you don't really know about. And I think that's ultimately what this is about. It's about, from the outside, looking at it and saying, hey, maybe don't always give the benefit of the doubt to the person we think is better off. And I'll tell you this story, just to add on to it. Let me just give you a very clear-cut idea to end it, because I think it needs to be said, but it's also very important because it'll clearly make my point. So everybody remembers, of course, Bernie Madoff. He's the gentleman who, like, literally had the biggest Ponzi scheme in human history, right? Which he got thrown in jail for. But think about this, right? And I'll ask this to anybody. Let's say you're walking down the street and you saw a black guy with a hoodie on, or like a biker with tattoos all over his head. Most people would probably cross the street. But if you take a businessman in a suit, you would probably just be totally cool being around this guy. But that's the thing, is that Bernie Madoff for 30 years wore a suit, and he gained people's trust with their money. And over 30 years, he just absolutely ravaged and ripped through people's lives, taking their savings and literally putting poor people in the poorhouse, on the street. Like, it is known fact, okay? But here's the thing. You might say, well, oh, those people, they were wealthy, they got their money back. No, they didn't. That's the thing. He ripped off celebrities. He ripped off people with pensions. He ripped off everybody. But why? Because everybody trusted the suit. But here's the crazy part about it. I want you to guess how much money this gentleman stole. Total. Now, you might want to say like 100 million, like 500 million. You know what I mean? I'll have to give you credit. You know what I mean? If you said like 500, 600, 700 million, because you could say you're close, but you're wrong. Bernie Madoff stole an estimated $65 billion in 30 years from an estimated 4,800 people, all while wearing a business suit. To me, most people wouldn't be scared of him because when we think of like biker gangs, thugs or whatever, we think that they're direct harm. But who really did more harm? Just think about that. Really think about that. The next time you look at that guy in the suit, is he really somebody you want to be around? So it's just a food for thought, But let me ask you this. What if fear says more about the human mind than the thing people are actually afraid of? So just hold on to that fear part. And also remember Bernie Madoff in this story, because I think it kind of we're kind of hitting a theme here. But I just want you to hold on to that, okay? But with that being said, hopefully you enjoyed this story. Hopefully you enjoyed like my little analogy about the story as well, how it's relevant today. And with that being said, come on back and join us for another story. And until next time, take care.